You guys are in for an actual treat today. I have just hung up from chatting with John for an entire hour. Actually, I think it was more than that. We covered so much. John's business is two studios split into two different cities across the US. He's going to tell you more about that. He has to revenue over 60 grand per month just to pay the bills of the studio, pay himself, pay his second shooters or assistant shooters and his entire team, 60 grand a month. And so you can imagine that he needs lots of leads, lots of bookings, and a pretty high average sale too. We got into all of that mostly in the second half about having employees, being a manager, how much the business needs to make, his booking funnel, where those leads come from, this kind of stuff we spoke about in the second half. But in the first half, which is for everybody here right now, is a bit of, a bit about John's studio, that he's working with a team. We spoke about being a specialist and a generalist, and if you can be both, incorporating humans with dogs, where John's clients come from, the importance of education, which was actually the topic of today's interview, but we got a bit distracted and covered absolutely everything as well. So basically, tune in, listen up. There's some great lessons to be learned, and I can't wait for you guys to hear this interview today.
Welcome to the Pet Photographers Club. Tune in as experts share their insights to help grow your business with higher sales, creative marketing, and kick-ass business strategies. Now on to the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Pet Photographers Club. I'm your host, Kirsty McConnell, and today I'm chatting with John Glazer of John Glazer Photography in the US. I'm actually going to pass it over to you for a moment, John, and I'm going to get you to introduce yourself to the audience, where you're based, where your multiple studios are in the US, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be a part of this, and thanks for inviting me to be on your podcast. I have a studio in Houston, Texas, in the US, and then this last year we actually opened one in New York City. I tested it out, and it's been working out really well, and so we actually moved our associate photographer from Houston up to New York to run that studio, and then I run the studio down here, but I go up to New York every now and then throughout the year. We do mostly dogs and families, but we also do like headshots and stuff like that. But the majority of our work is in studio dog portrait photography.
Nice. Okay. So already I'm sure the listeners' ears are perked that not only do you have one studio, like an actual studio space, but two, and not exactly nearby to each other. I mean, you have to fly between those two cities, don't you?
Yes.
Okay. So you've got these two studios, an associate shooter at least. Are you still shooting?
Yes. So I shoot some here in Houston. I have another associate photographer that we hired and trained up before, Ricky, who is my photographer in New York. We got Alex is our new guy, and he does the majority of the work down here. I do all the weekday work, like Monday through Friday, and then a couple of weekends a month. Most of our portrait stuff happens on the weekends, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, because that's when families are available with kids in school and everything. We don't do evening shoots in the weekdays because we found that just to be a pain. And then I do all like the business headshot, corporate headshot type of stuff throughout the week. And like I said, a couple of weekends a month or a weekend a month or something like that, I'll do the weekend portrait sessions. Just I like to stay in the mix. I like to still photograph people and dogs and be with my clients and everything. But I have two kids and a wife, and I wanted to have a little bit of a life, and they're growing up and doing a lot more activities. So I needed to set up my business in a way that I could not have to be here every single weekend, but still be running a business and making money. And so it's worked out really well for us. Our photographers are amazing. We all do the same thing. They're trained by me, so we keep the same style. So John Glazer Photography has turned into kind of a brand and not just a person. And then I fly. When I started New York, I went up there 2 times a month, so every other week basically, and did weekend sessions. We rented a shared studio space And then when we found out that it was a viable thing, I just happened to be I was on the fourth floor of the building that I was in, and the fifth floor came available for a full time studio, and it's amazing space. I'm jealous of it because it's not like our Houston studio is nice, but our New York studio is amazing, and it's huge. It's like 2,500 square feet, and it's just very open, and there's so much we can do with it. Fifth floor opened up and they offered it to me to rent it full time. And so we rent it full time and do a similar model up there where we do Friday, Saturday, Sunday shoots. And then the weekdays, at least for now, because we're not doing as much headshots up there yet because Ricky is not as versed in headshots yet as I want to be doing it on his own. But we rent out the space to other photographers and stuff that want to use it so that we can make some money back from the rent. Because as you can imagine, in New York City, if you don't know anything about New York, it's a lot more expensive than it is here in Houston. And so if I can make money back off of renting the studio a full few times a week, then that helps with the bottom line and everything. So anyway.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. So just give me a rundown then, sorry. What percentage of your client bookings are in terms of numbers, not money,
Yeah.
are headshots? What percentage are families? And what percentage are pets these days?
I don't have those serious breakdowns, but if I were to venture to say, like when it comes to the family versus dogs and families, like because we like to wrap families with dogs. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
I find a lot of dog photographers, at least in our area, when you go to their websites, it's just dog, 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 and there's no humans that are related to the dogs. And we treat our sessions kind of like the dog is like a kid. It's part of the
Mhm.
family, so we still incorporate the family. But if you talk about like dog and family together, I would say that's about 70% of what we do. Family and other things that like, so we do some athlete stuff like high school athletes and little kid athletes and stuff, and do some real dramatic stuff with that. So I would wrap that into the family stuff, and so that's about the 20%. And right now the headshots is only about 10%. We're
Okay.
building on that, but it's still really low, and it's growing. This year it's already grown a lot from last year, and honestly I didn't focus on it a whole lot until this year. And this year I'm really trying to grow it, one because I like doing that kind of work, and two, a lot of my corporate headshot clients that come in and do corporate headshots, they see the beautiful artwork that's on the wall for family and dogs and go, I have a family, I have a dog, and they come back and become a client in that realm as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if that happens because doing the headshot, you're getting them, exposed to your other work, and so you would hope that that organically leads to future bookings. So obviously, you're making your clients happy if they're then booking additional sessions, or you and your team are. Okay, so you're
Yes.
doing 70% with pets, and then
Yeah.
another 30% that are focused people only. And what I'm
Yeah.
interested in about that, John, is that a lot of people kind of do the reverse. A lot of photographers, they're maybe primarily people, but they want to be pets. And then they slowly build up pets more, people less. And then often, eventually, we see people that just specialize in only doing pets. They won't do anything else. Or if they do, they don't advertise it, they don't put it anywhere because we're so focused, myself included, we're so focused on building this identity as being a dog photographer or a pet photographer and becoming kind of known as the expert in that field, which is one business model and it certainly works well. But I'm really interested to hear that you're focusing on a totally different growth model, I suppose you would say. And it sounds like it's working for you because you've just opened a second studio. So, what is your thought around that, around this? Can you still be the expert and also the generalist?
So, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with photographers about this, and I know there's a wide gamut of opinions about this. I know there's people that say you should only focus on what you do really well, and I don't just like I would never do weddings, like that's not my thing. But I think that's a completely different realm
Uh-huh.
than doing dog and family photography, right? And I think somebody doing weddings would struggle doing dog and family photography because it's just different, especially and it's studio based where you know weddings and stuff is more natural light and on location strobes if you're using them and stuff like that. But I think that, to me, light is light, and I use a lot of strobes, and we also have some constant lights for those dogs that are a little skittish, but they're cabled strobe or constant lights. So we try not to use them unless we have to. But light is light to me, and as long as you can harness the light and learn how to use the light, it's the subject that you have to work with. And if you can figure out how to best work with the subject, I think you can do a variety of things. So, like I said earlier, I do athlete sessions, and I used to be a coach, like coached football and girls basketball at a high school. So I love working with athletes, and I know how to talk to them. And so that's what kind of got me into that realm. We've gotten known for, like, wow, he creates some really cool dramatic stuff that they're not your team photos. It's not something you're going to get on photo day with your team. And then the family stuff is actually how we started the studio. We we did a lot of family sessions, and then we got our own dog in our own house, and I took some photos of my kids with our dog when we got her, and I started promoting it just to try it out and see what it would be like. And it blew up. Like, I mean, immediately we were starting to get anybody and everybody wanted to come in and do dog sessions because, one, we do a lot of black and white photography, and I think that's a genre that we don't see very often. We still offer color, but we really specialize in the black and white look. And then I think that differentiates us. But then, two, like I said before, I find when I do my market research in my area that dog photographers in my area, in a lot of areas, I feel, don't incorporate the human as much within their photography. And it's just all about the dog. And I, like I said earlier, like, I feel like the dog is part of the family. It's like your kids. It's like having mom and dad come to a session, and you're just going to take pictures of the kids and no pictures of mom and dad and the kids and not create
Mhm.
those memories. And so by doing that, it kind of makes it a natural bond of doing dog photography and family photography because you're doing one and the same, only your dogs are kids, and then when you go and do a family session and there's no dogs, it's the same kind of thing. You're just doing it with kids and no dogs. So the posing doesn't change a whole lot. Obviously, you're going to be with dogs different than you are with kids, but I make the joke when people say, "Hey, I want to do dog photography. What should I expect?" And I ask them, have you ever done sessions with multiple, like, 2 and 3 year olds in a session at the same time? And if they say yes, and I said, yeah, I'll say, well, then you probably could. If you were able to handle that and not lose your mind, you might be able to do dog sessions because it's not much different in the chaos that comes with doing a dog session. Then you have 2 and 3 year olds that are losing their mind, and you have an attention span of like 20 minutes. And so I that's the kind of the mentality of what I have with that is just like, to me, they're
Mhm.
one and the same. So it's not like it's two different genres, and I just meld them together. It's about working with people. Like, posing is posing, but what I find, I'm a big Peter Hurley fan. And what I love and I learned a lot about with Peter Hurley is how you interact with clients. And that interaction creates the images that we create, right? And it's not about like, hey, put your head here and move here, do this or whatever. It's about like, hey, like, do this and get a reaction or get that connection, or you say things and you tell them to do things, or you make them laugh, or you make them get serious or something like that. And it's the same kind of thing with dogs. Obviously, you can't tell the dog, be serious, give me a laugh, give me a smile or whatever. So that part is a little bit more, you're going with the flow. The other thing too is, and I didn't say this, I used to do photojournalism with sports. I used to photograph sports when it comes to like football, basketball, and college pro stuff like that. I used to be a freelance photographer for USA Today Sports Images. And I think that helps me, especially in the dog world, because when they're in a studio, it's like you have to put on your photojournalist hat in a way, because everything that they do in a studio is a potential for a photograph. Because you're not going to pose a dog, and a lot of sometimes you're not going to pose a dog at all because they just won't cooperate. And sometimes you can pose a dog because they're good and they do commands and all that stuff. But you always have to be at the ready and have your camera ready to take that photo because, like, you never know what a dog's going to do. Just like you're not going to know what a 2 or 3 year old's going to do, and that's a photo.
Okay, so yeah, that makes total sense, John, because I was picturing that, like myself, for example, as a primarily dog photographer, but definitely specialist pet photographer, offering nothing else. I can plaster that all over my website, and I really used that to set myself apart. So I was wondering, like, how you go about the same thing because you can't really do that, but all of your or most of your leads are coming through Facebook anyway, then it makes sense that that particular ad can really speak to dog people. And that's what's showing you already kind of automatically kind of shows you as the expert anyway, because you're appealing especially to them. So yeah,
Right.
that does make sense.
Well, and then on our website too, we have, like, we have the different genres and stuff, and so people can go and see that. Oh, like, does he really do dogs? And then they can see, like, there's our body of work that we can show you. Like, oh, okay, wow, that's outstanding work, and I want to work with them. But the other side too, real quick on that, is I think another thing that kind of differentiates myself as a dog photographer that's very different in a lot of areas. I find, at least in my observation, I do studio dog photography, where most dog photographers I find go out on location and they don't do a lot of studio work. We don't do any location work. It's all in studio. So when we have people come and say, "Hey, can you do on location dog photography?" I'm like, "We don't do that,"
Mhm.
and we've lost some clients because of that, but that's making that differentiator of, like, I'm not a on location dog photographer. Uh, I can do great work if you want to bring them into the studio, but we're not going to go to you.
Yeah, yeah, I see exactly what you mean. So you're almost saying instead, like our specialty, our niche is here with this particular backdrop and this particular environment, like vibe, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're still setting
exactly.
yourself apart. John, I got you on the show today because I wanted to talk about the importance of education. We're 20 minutes in and we haven't even touched on
It's all right.
so no, I mean, you've shared tons of gold already, and I've already got a bunch of notes to cover in the extended half of the episode as well, which is of course for members only. But before we pause from the free listeners and get into that for the members only, I do want to touch on education a little bit because I'll say, like, quite surprised the other week. For the listener, I was hosting a online live training for Andrew Helmich of PhotoBizX, another podcast, which if you guys aren't listeners, I highly recommend, of course. I was hosting a live training for Andrew and his audience, which was about transitioning into pet photography. And I'm on the Zoom call. It was about to start, and pop and on to the screen pops John, and I was like, "What the hell are you doing here? You're like $1 million studio owner, and you're coming to learn this. You already specialize in pets." I was quite surprised, and then, well, I was quite also humbled. And when you wrote me some beautiful feedback, I was very proud as well. But I was really intrigued that what were you doing there? I mean, first of all, I mean, I know you don't just come to mind. I've then realized that you do spend a lot of time, expanding your knowledge and continuing to stay up to date through education. But what is it that makes you, let's take the training the other week. What made you want to do that training? One that you don't really need, why did you
Right.
jump into that?
Well, I think, like you said, I don't really need. I don't think you can never learn enough. I used to, like I said, I used to be a coach, and we would go to coaching conferences and stuff, and you would hear the same old stuff over and over and over and over again. But then there was always that nugget of information. I was like, "Ooh, that's gold. I could use that," or whatever. And I think I took that kind of into my photography business. It's like I can always learn from somebody else. I mean, I learn from people that I'm working with, that I'm helping them with their business, because I'm like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that," or type of thing. But
Mhm.
you're a pet photographer. What am I doing? Like, I learned a lot of stuff from you in that podcast that I'm just like, okay, I never thought about doing it that way, or I never thought, like, one of the things you said about with the treats, like, we've always said, bring the treats, bring a treat, because I've always been worried about, like, dog food allergies or something like that. I don't want to have a treat and then the dog has a reaction to it or something like that. And we have some treats in the studio in case they don't bring stuff. but I loved what you said about that. And I was just like, okay, we're going to change a little bit of how we're going to treat that and have these nicer higher end treats that are like different, that the dog's probably not going to have experienced in their life, and it makes it different. So I learned stuff there. I learned some stuff that you were doing with marketing that I thought was really cool, and your partnerships with different people and stuff. But all that to be said, is just like I felt like I could get something out of it. You're doing the same thing that I'm doing, and you have an expertise in this. Obviously, when it came to you, like I know it came up a little bit about like how to work with people in the actual session itself, and you do a lot of outdoor stuff, and you covered a lot of that. But I'll be honest, I kind of checked out during that time, but that's because I don't do that kind of thing, right? We don't have like
Mhm.
our dogs can't run and play and get photos in our studio. It's more posed and with the interaction with their humans and stuff like that. But anyway, I that's just me. I like to learn. I mean, I'm very active in Photo BizX. It's one of my favorite places to learn. I'm listening to and like I love Andrew's podcast because it's like a variety of things and genres and stuff. Now, I will caution the listener that you have to be careful with that too, because I used to be one of these people. You would learn something new from somebody and you get this little gold nugget of information that you thought, oh, this is going to revolutionize my business. And then you end up going all different directions and you're not staying on your path.
Yeah, that's a really good
So
point.
so when you go through something like that and you're learning from somebody else, if it's a different genre or somebody that's doing the same thing as you, I've had to learn to stay the course with what makes sense for my business. So it's just like, in my past, I could have listened to your course with Andrew, and you say, we do on location and we go out to the beach and we do that. And I would be like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Let's change course and let's do all of that instead of what we're already doing and be successful with. And now it makes it all scattered, right? Where I'm like, no, I can implement the treat thing just in my own studio, or I can implement some of these marketing ideas to get more people into the studio. So that's the thing. I mean, I've learned stuff like I said, I mentioned Peter Hurley earlier. He's a headshot photographer, but I use stuff that he talks about all the time in my family sessions all the time. Just because he's a headshot photographer, like he teaches how to pose and how to interact with people. Like that's a big part of what he does. And
Mhm,
and I learn a ton from him from that, along with the lighting and everything else that goes with that. So I just
mhm,
think that education is a really important thing, but I think you have to be careful and cautious that it's one thing I think I see with photographers a lot. They're always chasing, especially ones that are trying to build their business and get their business going. They're trying to chase that, what's that niche or what's that thing that's going to make me successful and make my business successful. And it's just like, you still have to stick with what's your thing, but how do you implement those little nuggets of information that you get to meld with whatever you're already doing?
And I think actually, yeah, you just made 2 very good points, right? Number 1, that people are often, and I see this a lot, people are looking for a shortcut. And okay, yeah, there are some, by attending different trainings and listening to podcasts, these kind of things, yes, you are going to shortcut your, because you're not having to do the failures yourself a lot of the time. You can hear that, oh, somebody else has already made that mistake and you can learn from them rather than doing it yourself. A lot of the time, sometimes you're also going to make the mistakes too, and that's okay. But people are often looking for that like golden, like that wand, magic wand that takes you from 0 to 6 figures or seven
Right.
figures, like overnight. And it doesn't really work like that, at least not from one particular piece of advice,
Right.
as you and I both know, and most of the listeners too, I'm sure. So that's definitely one part of it, that you have to kind of be going in just trying to take the little snippets and then putting all the little snippets together to form your own business, like you were saying. And then this one key word that you used then, which is one of my favorite words, the listeners are like going to roll their eyes, oh, Kirsty's at it again, was implementing it. You said, like, I can implement, little bits and pieces, etc. And that's the main thing, isn't it? I mean, there's no point in you giving up. I mean, that training was what, 2 hours? You gave up 2 hours of
Yeah.
your time. There's no plus the $98 or however much it was. There's no point in you doing that if you're not going to implement what you've just learned. So
Well, and And I will say that the implementation thing, and this is something as you as a business owner that's been successful, like can understand, and audience members that like would listen to this podcast that are still trying to build their business and understand their businesses. When you listen to a podcast or you listen to that one thing, whatever that one thing is there's 900 other things that are going on in the background. And so just because you've heard this one little snippet of information, that doesn't mean that, like, if you implement that one little thing, that all of a sudden magically everything's going to fall in place, because there's so many other things that go into it. And so you have to learn those along the way. And that's the hard thing. I have a really good friend of mine. He's a photographer up in Canada, and he and I talk about it all the time. It's like, if being a business owner was easy, we would all be doing it, and it's not. And like I liked what you said. It's just like everybody's looking for that shortcut or that get rich quick or that like build my business fast type of thing. And I was lucky that my business kind of shot off and took off really fast, but there was so much that went into that can't be addressed in an hour-long podcast, and like my background, I used to have a project manager background. I used to be a coach and work with kids and work with adults and teach them and all that kind of stuff. And so all these little snippets of what happened in my life to lead me to this point were those educational things that got me to this point, and helped me to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a lot of failures along the way. Like, people I think look at you and like people like you and me and stuff, and they go, wow, they're so awesome. But they don't see all the non-awesome things that happened with us before we got to that part. I want to be like John. And I'm like, okay, well, if you would have known the things that happened before John became the person that then you wouldn't want to be me because you would have had to go through some of that heartache. You know what I'm saying? But like all those heartache things got me to be successful, and those lessons learned. And then like we were talking about before, learning along the way, and always be learning along the way, and try and find those things that are going to help you refine and do better in what you're already doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. John, I think that's the perfect note to wrap up the first part of the episode, because that was some really nice advice that you closed off with there. I do have tons more that I want to chat with you about. There was a couple of questions
Absolutely.
in the Facebook group, because we always ask the members like, hey, we've got this person coming on the show. What kind of questions do you have for them? So I've got a few questions from them to ask you, mostly around your marketing. Also, I want to go a bit deeper into the importance of including humans with the dogs, as you're mentioning, is important to you. And maybe if we get time also about you're opening a studio as well. So let's see how we go for time with that one. But for now, we're going to wrap up part one. But first of all, where is the best place for the listener to check out what it is that you do?
You can go to johnglazerphotography.com. It's Glaser. Everybody gets that wrong, but it's JOHNGLASER photography.com. Or I'm on Instagram at John Glaser Photography, and also on Facebook at John Glaser Photography as well.
Awesome. And as always, I will put those links in the show notes anyway. So if you did miss them, just head on over to thepetphotographersclub.com/the-podcast and search John, and it will come up. It's usually in the bottom of the show notes on whatever device you're listening to this episode on anyway. That is it for part one of this episode. If you're a member of the club, of course, you can continue listening to part two in the member zone or via your private RSS feed in your favorite podcast player. Don't forget, if you're not a member yet, of course, you can join today. It's just $10 a month, and club membership includes tons of perks like hearing the rest of this episode and getting some discounts on Zoom events and a lot of other things that we offer at the club as well. So just head on over to thepetphotographersclub.com/join to find out more.
Thanks for listening to the Pet Photographers Club. To subscribe to the podcast, check out other episodes, and keep up to date, head to thepetphotographersclub.com.